It's great to have this honor to welcome my good friend Joe Bray and Rita. Great to have you here. Whatever we say about Joe, you got to give her a round of applause too, because she's behind the scenes supporting him as he goes out and about doing good work for the United States Army. So Rita, thank you. You're part of the team. You've read about what a civilian aide to Secretary of the Army does, or you wouldn't be here at the luncheon. So I'm not going to talk about the responsibilities, but I just want to personalize it for you. I had the honor of commanding at Fort Polk, which is now Fort Johnson, and then down to Panama, and then back to my home away from home, Fort Drum. And at each stop, I had dealings with the civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army. These are really important agents for the Secretary of the Army. Now some do it for the title, some do it for the parking space, some do it so they can sit in the first row, at ceremonies. But then there are folks like our great Tony Keating up at Fort Drum, who would get up at all hours of the morning to bid farewell to soldiers as they deployed in harm's way. And Tony would be there when they came back. And Tony was about in Watertown supporting our soldiers and helping businesses support our soldiers. I didn't think Tony could be topped. But then along comes my friend Joe Bray. Gloria and I were at BBVA Compass. They're not here anymore, are they? It's now PNC, I guess. That's why we took our money away from them and went somewhere else, Broadway. But we were there doing some business at the old office down off of Jones Maltzberger, and we had finished up our business, and in walks this fella and started talking to us, and it was Joe Bray. This was about 15 years ago, and he had gone and Googled, Magruder, and we shared being Vietnam veterans, and I could tell that very first time that he was passionate about the United States Army and what he could do for the United States Army. Well, then a few years later, the Secretary of the Army said, "Hey, Joe, how about being the civilian aide secretary of the Army for San Antonio and for South Texas?" And he said, "Throw me in, Coach." And he's been doing incredible work. If you're out and about in the San Antonio community, if it has anything to do with recruiting battalion or recruiting stations, or has anything to do with veterans, particularly the Edgewood boys down on the south side of San Antonio, there's Joe. Joe's out and about. Joe is a key conduit all the way from the Secretary of the Army down to the individual recruiter here in San Antonio and the surrounding area. Couldn't think of a better civilian leader. He's retired, but 40 years in the banking business here in San Antonio to be a conduit to help particularly the recruiting cause, but also to help veterans, our fellow Vietnam veterans. So like I said, Rita, thanks for supporting him. I know he's out and about, gone an awful lot, but he's doing, in my opinion, God's work in helping the United States Army. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my good friend, Joe Bray.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Good? Okay. So as Lawson said, my name is Joseph Bray. I'm a United States Army veteran. I'm a United States Army Vietnam veteran, but more importantly, I'm a United States Army soldier for life. So the oath of enlistment that I took on June 17th, 1970, I still consider that to be valid and in force today. So I'm going to cover a few remarks today, but the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up my 25-page slide deck, and I'm going to go over two major things. Number one, the new and improved DD-214 form, which I'll go through each step of the form with you this afternoon. And then secondly, I'm going to go over the process that you're going to use to get your new post access card. Now, the first thing you have to do is you have to go online, which is very challenging, and it may take you 1 or 2 hours to go online to make the appointment to get your card. Once you make the appointment to get your card, when you go to the facility to get your card, you may have to wait in line 4 to 5 hours before you can get your card. So those are two of the things I'm going to cover in my PowerPoint presentation, with your permission. Is that okay? I jest. So, a few years back, these were taken in the 1970 to 1971 era. I was born in the state of Delaware. I graduated from high school in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I went on to college at Oshkosh State University in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Lasted 1 semester. On a 4-point scale, I managed to get a 0.86 grade point. Sure had a good time, though. Had to go back home. My parents lived in Chicago then. I went back home, tail between my legs, got a job. I was a forklift driver at Nabisco cereal plant where they made shredded wheat. Ultimately got drafted, and I spent 2 years, almost 2 years in our Army. Did my basic and AIT at Fort Polk, Louisiana. Did 13 months in Vietnam. I went over as a grunt, thank God, knock on wood. They needed some tall dudes. I was 6'4", 215 pounds. They asked me to be an MP, so I volunteered to become an MP, and I was with the 720th Military Police Battalion in Long Binh, Vietnam for 13 months. Came home, went back to my job. My lovely wife, Rita, we've been married for 51 years now, convinced me to go back to college. Oh boy. I was really scared about that after my first experience, but I did go back to college, ultimately getting my undergraduate degree, my master's degree, all paid for by the GI Bill, and then ultimately spent 42 years at Lawson in banking in the financial services area, thoroughly enjoying my time in that sector. I just really enjoyed it, got to meet a lot of people. Retired in June of 2016, and I'm going to tell you what I've been doing since then until now. So bear with me. So here we go. So some of the things I'm doing now since retiring in June of 2016. I am the civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army, reporting directly to the Secretary. I'm a distinguished quartermaster of the United States Army North. I'm the chairman of the San Antonio Community Action Committee, which I'll speak a little bit more about a little later. I'm the chairman of the board of the Bexar County Military and Veterans Services Foundation, and that's a part of the Bexar County organization that
You gotta use a mic.
Okay.
We got a lot of hearing.
Okay, I'm sorry, thank you, Lawson. Oh, is that better? No? Oh, thank you. Well, Lawson's always taking care of me. See, he was a general and I was a Spec 4, so that kind of tells you where I stand. So, I'm the chairman of the board of the Bexar County Military and Veterans Services Center. That's really near and dear to my heart because that helps transitioning soldiers getting out of our military, and it also helps our veterans, and it helps them find jobs. It also helps them with their benefits. I'm a member of the Edgewood District Veterans, which Lawson alluded to. The Edgewood area and the Edgewood Independent School District is very, very near and dear to my heart. That is a group predominantly of Vietnam veteran alumni at that school and that school district that do so much good for that area in terms of providing scholarships for kids, clothes for kids during the winter, etc. And then I'm very involved in Quilts of Valor. Is anybody familiar with Quilts of Valor in the room here? Okay, so I assume there's several that have gotten quilts. But we're very active in the San Antonio community, especially me. I like to identify, especially Vietnam veterans, identify them, and then every quarter to 4 months we hold a ceremony and award quilts of valor to deserving veterans. And I know, Lawson, you have yours, you've got yours, and Bob, you have yours as well. So I'm very actively involved in that. And then I'm in a whole bunch of other organizations. I'm a member of the Chamber of Commerce. I was a member of Rotary, and so many other organizations that I touch almost every day. So those are a few things that I do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Okay, so very quickly, civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army. What an honor it is to be in that capacity. I was nominated here locally by the commander of Army North, vetted through a process, ultimately selected by the Secretary in December of 2019. So I've been a CASA now for going on 5 years. So I get to advise the Secretary, I get to advise the Army Chief of Staff and all the other generals and senior non-commissioned officers. I get to advise them about what I see, what Joe Bray sees in the area that I'm responsible for. And I'm going to get into that in a few minutes. But what a privilege and an honor it is to do that, to give the Secretary, to give our leadership a civilian's viewpoint of how all of us in the community view our military, view our Army, so they can understand from our point of view how we see it and how we interact with it. Okay? So these are the 6 things I want to cover today. Recruiting, retention, soldier transition, veteran support, community engagement, and teamwork. And teamwork is by far, I think, the glue that keeps everything together from my perspective. Okay, so I'm going to have to go back here because I have quite a bit of notes, because I'm probably going to spend more time on recruiting than any of the other bullet points. So I am sure all of you know in this room today that recruiting is a real challenge, and it's a real big challenge for the Army today, as it is for the rest of the armed services. The United States Army has missed its recruiting objective in the last 2 years. Right now, we're forecasting that the Army will hit its recruiting objective this fiscal year, but albeit on a much smaller mission. Now, there's a lot of things that are impacting recruiting in the Army and across our other branches of the service. Only 3, ladies and gentlemen, only 3 out of 10 young men and women even qualify to join our military today. Only 3 out of 10. So that 7, it could be for health reasons, it could be for legal reasons, it could be they couldn't pass the Army's ASVAB test. But anyway, those 7 out of 10 are not even eligible. That means only 3 out of the 10 are. Just about 25% of young kids between the ages of 17 and 24. And so the universe that the Army and all the other branches of the service recruit from is ever shrinking. Now, one of the things that the Army did, and it goes back to August of 2022, it established what they call the Army Prep Program. And the Army Prep Program basically addresses 2 areas, and the 2 areas are as follows. Number 1, if you cannot qualify by passing the ASVAB test, the test that really determines what type of military occupational specialty you are capable of, if you can't pass that, and the passing score is 30, okay? So if you can't pass that, the Army has said, we're gonna reduce that. We're gonna reduce that to 20 to 18. So if you didn't achieve a score 30 or higher, but yet you were 18 to 30, we're gonna bring you into this prep program. And you get to stay in the prep program for 90 to 120 days, and we're gonna help you, we're gonna educate you, so hopefully you can pass that ASVAB test. And if you do, then you can ship on to basic training. The second item, your BMI, your body mass index. So obviously we have a big challenge today in the United States with being overweight and obesity. So a lot of the kids that can't qualify don't have the proper level of BMI. They don't meet the Army standards. So let's say you're off for 6%, 7% from the standard. The Army says, we'll take you in if you meet all the other regulations, just like the ASVAB test. You meet all the other regulations, but you didn't pass the ASVAB. We'll take you in. So you have 90 to 120 days to get your BMI corrected. And so when you look at the Army hitting its mission this year, when you think about the number, by the way, the prep program has been really, thank you so much, has been really successful. 95% of the kids that go to the prep program ultimately ship to basic training. That's a huge success. That's a huge success. And a like number complete basic training and then ship on to their advanced individual training group. So it's a very successful program. But I want to stress with this point that the Army is not reducing its standards. That young soldier that has not met the BMI regulation or the ASVAB regulation, they have to meet the regulation before they can ship to basic training. So the Army's not dropping its standards. It's actually helping kids that want to join, that really want to be a part of the United States Army. They're helping them get there. Think of it this way. Think of West Point. If you're a young man or a young woman and you do everything you can to get into West Point, but you don't make the grade, you don't meet the standard, you can go to the prep program if they accept you. And then after you're successful in the prep program, you have the opportunity, if you meet all the requirements, to actually go to West Point. So that's the way I look at the prep program in the Army. But here's what I want to say about how it's helping the Army. If the United States Army didn't have that prep program now, we would not even come close to hitting our mission this year. Because this year, approximately 20,000, this fiscal year, approximately 20,000 young men and young women will have gone through that prep program and went on to basic and AIT. So those are young men and young women that wouldn't have made the cut if it weren't for the prep program. Now, I hope I'm not putting too much on you all at once, and if you have any questions at any time, please raise your hand. I'll do my best to answer them. So recruiting is a challenge, and even that segment of the prep program that is so successful right now, think of this. There's a large pool of those kids that wanted to join, that don't meet the regulations. And now we're going through that bubble. Once that bubble pushes through, then it's going to be the same thing every year, just like it is kids graduating from high school. So I hope that kind of puts the challenge that we face in recruiting, not just in the United States Army. We have to recruit the most, so it's a big challenge for us. But all branches of the military are facing this right now. So right now, in addition to that, getting into our schools, even in the state of Texas, is a huge challenge. Not every school treats our recruiters the same. There are some schools that give our recruiters full access, that even ask and allow some of our recruiters to teach classes There are some schools, and by law, by federal law, the schools have to allow the recruiters into the schools. But that's just saying they allow them into the schools. And then there are some schools that the recruiters go into, and the staff at the school will say, you can set your table up in front of the cafeteria. You can put all your collateral material on the table. Your recruiters have to stand behind the table, and your recruiters cannot approach a student. The student has to approach the recruiter. So if you look at it, there's a huge continuum of full access to limited access. And I hope that makes sense to you as well. Now, as a result of all the things that I said, many of our educators, many of our parents, many of the people in our business community, and even our veterans are beginning to have, if not already have, a neutral to negative attitude toward our Army, toward our military. And that's a big hurdle to get over. Another thing that the Army struggles with, and again, I'm giving you Joe Bray's opinion. This is what I see every day. So the United States Army does a really, really good job of recruiting tactically. In other words, every day the recruiters are responsible for making so many phone calls, getting so many appointments, and bringing so many soldiers in a month. That's tactical. That's like every day I do this, and I have my head down, and I'm going at 150 miles an hour to get that job done. That's a tactical job. What the Army, in my opinion, doesn't do a good job of, it doesn't recruit strategically. And what I mean by that is, think of COVID. When COVID hit and the schools shut down, the Army recruiting effort basically shut down because it wasn't thinking strategically. Okay, another thing I want to comment on, as well as, which is a challenge for our Army, is the change in command. At the command level, at the brigade, at the battalion, at the company level, they change out every 2 years. So Joe Bray in San Antonio, every 2 years, I have to rekindle or start a relationship with a new brigade commander, battalion commander, and a company commander. And generally, those individuals coming into command have little to no recruiting experience. And lastly, the Army going through change is a very painful process. I want to say this in Texas. Texas is doing well. The state of Texas has a high propensity to serve. The young men and young women have a high propensity to serve. We're very blessed that we have a large, patriotic, Hispanic population as well. And then when you look at our high schools, and I'm in the high schools a lot. I get out to the high schools on a very frequent basis. And for a lot of our kids in high school today, there aren't many options. A lot of the kids don't see themselves going to college. They don't see that as an opportunity. But they do see the military as an opportunity. But we have a struggle, like I said, with the BMI issue and the ASVAB testing issue that really has impacted the ability for us to recruit effectively. I will say this about the San Antonio Recruiting Battalion here in San Antonio. I've been actively involved with them since 2010. The San Antonio Recruiting Battalion is the #1 battalion in the United States Army Recruiting Command out of 38 battalions. They recruit more young men and young women than any other recruiting battalion in the United States. And I think that's because they have a fantastic CASA. Well, I'm glad now I know everybody's awake. So in a nutshell, and there are a lot of other good things. Look, there are a lot of good things going on in San Antonio when it comes to education. Many good things. And I could spend hours on this topic. I wanted to hit the challenges because I'm the type of individual is I want to know what the problem is, what the challenge is. I want to be able to identify what we can do to correct it. And I want to find the right resources to bring to bear to make that happen. Retention. Oh, yeah. So I spent a lot of time on recruiting. And I could spend more, let me tell you. But retention is a big issue these days too. And I'm just hitting some of the big highlights in terms of what soldiers are calling me up and saying, hey, Mr. Bray, we're having a hard time. My wife works, I'm a soldier, or my wife's a soldier, and I'm a husband that's working outside the home. Finding childcare, the living accommodations. Have you ever been in some of the barracks on Fort Sam Houston that our soldiers are staying in for training? And the standard of living. So you're battling the front door. The front door is recruiting. And you're battling where you're inside the house. And you're battling issues that we're trying to overcome, like the items that I've mentioned above. And so it's moving on to the next one, soldier transition. Most of our young soldiers get out after their first tour of duty. So 4 to 6 years, they get out. And I know most of you understand this, but I can put it in my perspective, okay? I went in the service at 19. From the time I was born to the time I went in the military, I was mostly surrounded by my family, my mother and father. They gave me the rules, the regulations of what I needed to do and not do. I failed at college because I got outside that protective shield, so to speak. Then I went in the military, and then the Army or the military tells you everything you need to know what to do. Okay? So after my 2 years of being in the military and all the fine training that I got, I'm 21 years old, and the Army says, cut the cord, you're on your own. And then you got to deal with it. And then by that time, you're certainly not going to go back home and live with your mom and dad and go back to that environment. You've got to start taking care of yourself. You have to go out and buy your first car, pay for your first apartment, and all the other responsibility that comes along with that. And are you prepared to do that? Most young soldiers that are coming out of the Army are not prepared for that change. So going back to what I said about the Bexar County Military and Veterans Services Foundation, that organization is fantastic in identifying those young soldiers that, and even career soldiers that are getting out and they're trying to find their way. And let me give you a couple of examples what I do as a CASA, or I do as Joe Bray, and I'm lucky because of the past job experiences that I've had. When I have, let's say a general officer is retiring on Fort Sam, and I'll sit down with that general officer, we'll have a conversation about, okay, what's next in the life of General so-and-so? And the typical response is, well, I really don't know, and I haven't had time to think about it. So what I do is I will take the time to identify key people in the community that I can introduce to that retiring general and say, hey, take some time and just sit down with these individuals and just have a discussion. Something may bubble up and something may happen during that conversation that will help you out as you proceed through your transition. So, and when I transitioned out of the Army, when I left Vietnam 4 days before Christmas in 1971. I was in my jungle fatigues, I turned in my weapons, I got on a commercial airline, flew back to Fort Ord, and I was home completely out of the Army, done, by the 23rd of December. That was my transition. Now, it's a little bit more sophisticated and helpful now, but it still is not what it needs to be for those young soldiers that are getting out, that have to go through the examples that I've given. Veteran support. So you can tell recruiting, retention, soldier transition, they're all big challenges. And then you get to our veterans. Oh my gosh. With as much time as I spend with our veterans in this community, and this is a big veteran community, trying to remain faithful, trying to remain loyal, trying to remain positive. But it's challenging these days. It's very challenging. So what do we do when we talk about those four key elements? I want to talk a little bit about the SACAC, the San Antonio Community Action Committee, which I chair. It has about 65 active members and about as many volunteers if we need them. Those individuals that sit on that committee are military at all levels. They're community leaders at all levels, and educators. Those three compos. And so when we sit down and we have a quarterly meeting, and we sit down and we try to talk about the things that are common to all three of those compos. So we can sit down and develop strategies and tactics to address those commonalities for the benefit of the young men and the young women in our communities that go to our schools, our ISDs, that go to our colleges and universities as tech schools. And I've been involved in that since 2010, and that is really starting to bear fruit, especially with our educators. So the community engagement piece is really, really important, because all too often our military stands over here, and I'm sure you in this room see this. Our military stands here, our educators are here in their bubble, and then our community leaders are in their bubble dealing with their issues. And what I try to do as a CASA is to take each one of those areas and integrate them. I want to make sure the Army is integrated into education, is integrated into community leaders, and vice versa with all that, so we can all work together for the benefit of our kids. That gets back to the last point, bullet point of teamwork. And that's one thing that the United States Army has taught me in spades, not only when I was in for my 2 years, but more importantly, my time as a CASA and being able to interface with people like General Magruder, General Clark, and others. That the meaning of teamwork and why the Army has been around for so long is that's one of the cornerstones of the success of our Army. We do things together as a team. So if I could leave you with anything, that's, whatever you're doing, whatever you can do, think about how we can integrate, how we can work together with our military, our community, and our education, our educators, okay? I'm not gonna drop it and break it, okay? Okay, so as a CASA, some of the things that I've been doing recently is help our Army and military move the Defense Health Agency. We're moving about 1,800 people from the DC area down to San Antonio. We finally got that all but finalized. We have gotten the DoD Warrior Games will come to San Antonio in 2026. I just recently testified in front of the Texas House of Representatives, the Defense and Veterans Affairs Committee, on recruiting and quality of life issues, and that went extremely well. And then we're holding the Congressional Medal of Honor Society Conference and celebration here in San Antonio. this year, late September and October. One of the things I get to do, which is really probably most fun for me, is I get to give out scholarships to young men and young women graduating from high school, Minuteman scholarships, and then I work with the ROTC programs at the colleges. I write a lot of letters of recommendations. I've helped a lot of young men and women get into West Point. And just this past, in July, I did my very first Minuteman scholarship, full ride for a kid to go to TCU. The scholarship was valued at $225,000. He just graduated in July and commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Army. And then another big thing that we just completed at Palo Alto College, if you're familiar with the Alamo colleges, we actually set up a program at the college where it's a GED pathway to military and college. So young men and young women that decided to leave high school before they got their degree or graduated, they want to come join the Army, they want to get in college. The college and the United States Army came together in a partnership. Remember, this is what I talked about, the three legs, the three pillars, the community, education, and our Army brought Palo Alto College together. They're providing free space for our recruiters on campus. They teach the GED class to young men and young women that qualify for free, and then they can opt in to go to the Army or go on to college. So those are just a few things that I've had some fun with over the last year. Ladies and gentlemen, I sincerely hope I haven't bored you. I hope you can tell I'm passionate about what I do. I get paid a ton of money to do this. Zero, for sure. But any questions at all?
Yes, thank you for being here. Do you have any interactions with your counterparts in the other services?
Yes, but mostly with the Air Force, because the Air Force does have a program similar to the CASA program. And by the way, there are 120 CASAs across the country. Texas has 9. But yes, I do interface a lot with the Air Force, Marines and Navy a little bit, but they don't have the same type of program that the Army has. Yes, sir.
Recently, the civilian leadership has indicated that they would prefer that recruiters downgrade those recruits who are sons and daughters of military career people. In other words, they didn't want to develop a warrior
Right.
class.
Would you repeat this question, please, Jim?
Well, certain people want to downgrade the young men and young women that are sons and daughters of those that are already serving. So they don't want to create the perception of a warrior class in our military. So I don't know that I have any objective information on that, but here's what I can say. When I first became a CASA, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion was becoming a big thing in our Army and across the military. Less so now than it was then. And that was causing some challenges, and that's what turns away a lot of our parents, our educators, our business leaders, and our veterans we don't want a woke Army, we want an Army that will defend and protect and win America's wars. That's what we want.
Sure.
Any other questions? Ladies and gentlemen, I can stay here all day. This is a topic I
You're
love.
gonna be here by yourself, because everybody's leaving.
Thank you very much.